welcome. This is the Youth Coordinators Connect. I am Sierra Royster. I am the Youth Programs Coordinator from April, which is the Association of Programs for Rural Independent Living. We are excited to be able to go to continue these calls. We've been switching over what that looks like. And so we're excited that it's back up and running. So thank you all for joining us if you've been on before, and welcome to you if it's your first time. A couple of things that we all are gurus at, but just always like to mention, we do have the option for using your microphone and your webcam today. You can find those options in the bottom left of your screen. If you would like to use those, you can join into the conversation by muting and unmuting yourself, or you can press Alt-A. And then you can also join in by webcam if you would like and are able to. We do have closed captioning for today. You can view those captioning services on the same menu bar. There's a box that says CC. If you select that, you're able to see the captionings. If you would like them larger, you can also select the view full transcript, and that will let you see it, the whole transcript at one time, if that's easier for you. And then we also have a sign language interpreter for today. So they are at the top of the screen. Their square name is ASL English Interpreter Jamie. So if you go to the top right corner of that square, you'll see 3 dots there that you can select and pin the interpreter. And that will let you see just them. That way you don't miss any of the switching of squares that could happen during the call. And then if you are on the phone, we ask that you press *6 to mute and unmute. And if you need anything, please feel free to drop into the chat and ask away. And then I will also drop in my email if you would prefer to contact me there if you have any troubles during the call. Okay, so it's been a while. I'm excited to have everybody. Today, a couple of months ago, if you're on our email list, I sent out an email asking everybody about disability identity. What does that look like? Where you're at? What are youth experiencing in that regards? And, you know, how are you navigating that topic? Educating youth to feel empowered to identify with a disability. So there was lots of comments back and lots of suggestions, but one of the biggest things I got back was, why don't we have a call on this? I would love to hear what everybody's doing. So that's exactly what we're doing today. You guys have tons of ideas, and I think it's something we should dive into deeper for sure. So I would like to go ahead and open that up. If you want to share maybe something you emailed, because that might not have gone out to everybody, or the couple of things that I'm hoping to get out before we get started actually is I want to kind of talk about what is disability identity. We all talked about many different things of what that looks like. I'd also like to hear what you all are doing with youth. Do you feel like youth identify with having a disability? And what is that experience like? And then what techniques are you using to talk about that? Are there skills that you're covering before you even start talking about the identity of a disability and that kind of thing? So that's what I'm hoping that we can pull out of the conversation today. Those are some of the questions that you all had. So I'm just going to open it up. Let's start with, what do y'all identify, like when you're talking about disability identity, what do you think that looks like, or youth feel like that looks like to them? And in case you're new, we just jump in and I just sit here and stare at you. I'm trying to think who had. Oh, go ahead, Amy.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think for the youth, it varies. I think that some of them are more comfortable identifying themselves as a person with a disability than others.
Can I ask, why do y'all think that is? What do you think is the difference?
I personally don't think it's talked about within the classrooms. Something that we come up with a lot while either teaching virtually or in the classrooms when we're having them self-identify their disability is I don't have one. Um, and we do explain, try to put that positive spin on that. Yeah, everyone here has a disability. It's fine. If you don't know it, let's go ask your teacher and figure out what it is so you know it. And from that point, there's sometimes pushback from the students, sometimes not. It really varies on the environment that we're in.
I think that sometimes growing up, there's that negative stigma around having a disability. I grew up in the blind community, and we're very open and very like that. You know, we're very upfront about our challenges and things like that. But there are a lot of others who they don't have the support of like the blind community or the deaf community. You know, those communities are super big, so they have that support to be okay to identify with those things. And then there's a lot of you know, new things about some disabilities that people in our mainstream society think negatively about. So it's hard to express, you know, especially if it's a mental health disability. That's very negative in the eyes of a lot of people. So it's hard for them to um, identify, you know, express that.
Awesome. No, I unfortunately agree. Mels, do you want to? I see your hands up.
Yeah, I feel like one of the barriers was kind of something that we started like as a disability movement, we started with to make things better, but is actually like just how our culture has evolved. A lot of the time, like the idea of identity first versus person first. Like as a queer person, I never say, hi, my name's Mels, I'm a person with queerness. It's always like, yeah, I'm gay. And so I've taken that over to like being disabled. It's just like, yeah, no, I'm autistic and mentally ill. Like, I'm not a person with autism or a person with mental illness. And kind of setting that one of those things, whenever I have a youth inside of a group, that's one of the things I start off with, because it is even like a place where it's not just neutral to claim those identities, but actually seen as a positive. And it's just, we're fighting against a culture that was built to potentially like separate ourselves from our disabilities, when it's just like, no, it's a part of us. Like my mental illness makes things like I see the world in a whole different way, and it gives me the ability to do a lot of the work that I do. So, and bringing that to our youth, and it's just, I feel like we're just in this really big uphill battle with disability, this idea of like, no, we can claim this, we can claim a disability culture.
I see so many people in the chat. Cassidy, totally agree with that. Modeling in a positive way is such a positive thing. Oh, go ahead.
All I said was I agree with you 100%, Mels. I mean, personally, for myself, I can also relate to, for myself, I refer to myself if someone was to ask me what disabilities do I have, like the top two I have. I refer to myself as autistic and diabetic because they just are. It's almost like having curly hair. It just is. And I agree that but what I try to do is but I also know that everyone is on a different level of how they see themselves in their disabilities. So what my colleague Sarah and I have done is we've talked about using both, in our virtual youth ILSs, we've talked about both person first and identity first, and we've had questions and discussions about the pros and cons of each.
Mm-hmm. This is Heather from Options. So I just wanted to first off say I am so glad that people are saying that identity first instead of person first, because everyone that I seem to talk to in this area, I live in Illinois, just south of Chicago, it's all about person first. And if you aren't doing person first, then you're not supporting, you know, the independent living movement. And to me, those are two very different things. But on a side note, there is a YouTube video. It's a TED Talk by Stella Young. It's from 2014. And Stella gave an awesome, it's a 10-minute video, basically talking about how she's not people's inspiration, and talking about how disability isn't a bad thing. And she's humorous too. But I show that to my group. I've shown it a few times, and you know, they really embrace it and like, you know, what she says and whatnot. So she talks about how when she was younger, some community members approached her parents and wanted to give her a community award. And they asked them why. And they said, oh, well, because she, you know, gets up and goes to school, and, you know, just has a positive attitude and a smile on her face. And her parents were like, that's not worthy of an award. She doesn't, and she said too, I hadn't been doing anything that is considered great, worthy of an award. And she's had that happen to her a lot in her life. So lastly, sorry, I don't mean to keep on talking so much, but lastly, whenever I talk to my youth, I always say, you know, what is your different ability? And I want them to tell me about, you know, what is something that basically your disability allows you to do. And in the case of like having a mental health concern or a disability, you know, one of my youth has severe bipolar and whatnot, but she can walk into a room and read the room as far as like what are the emotions going on in the room before anybody else can get in the room. So she can read that room and can say, oh, this isn't going to be a great setup, or, you know, it seems like everyone's excited and whatnot. So that's just one example. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to second that video is a good video. We've used it too in some of our classes to get the discussion about identity and what it means to be a disability. The medical model versus the societal of
And how they themselves feel about being seen as an inspiration, quote unquote.
I have a question. I'm legally blind, and so I have a really hard time following the chat. I can't really focus on that. So if you guys put things in the chat, would you be able to like let us at least just verbalize it so that I can know to check? Because I cannot follow along. I do apologize.
Thank you for saying that. I try to, as long as they don't go really fast, I try to always read it out so that everybody is able to access it. But if I don't, definitely catch me and remind me. And always feel free to drop something in there and then say something. Somebody else?
So I'm Jessie with Active Reentry. I've noticed that, so my kids, I've been working with people who have disabilities for, I don't know, a few years, right? But my younger kids are way more accepting than my older kids, because since they were really little, it's been a part of, oh, we love these people, like all the, you know, everything like that. So they're more accepting of their peers who have disabilities. But my older boys, they're kind of like their grandpa. I shouldn't admit this to everybody, but they're just, Mom, I don't know how to approach this. I don't, where my younger kids just do it. So here, there hasn't been a lot of youth that even know that our programs over here even exist. So I've been reaching out and trying to make people aware and more comfortable with everybody around them, because just if you have a disability, you have one. Like I have anxiety and depression, and I mean the list could go on, and so it's just trying to make other youth more aware and more accepting of them instead of, like everybody was saying, the stigma with it all. Because it's a big part of where we live, but there's a huge stigma behind it. And it's like, no, it should just be more accepted, and they should be able to enjoy life the way that everybody else does, because everybody has some form of disability. So that's what I've been doing in Blanding, a little tiny town.
Awesome. And then Cindy dropped in the chat, most youth are at an age where they are trying to fit in with their peers, and so not want to admit that that they are different or have a disability. Disability awareness is part of our pre-ETS and ILS curriculum, and I always open with my disability and how almost every person has a disability at some point in their life. It really opens up some great conversation, and I think that goes back to somebody above saying that modeling it in a positive way is such a powerful thing. And if we, and Ryan had mentioned, if we claim it as IL staff, it starts that conversation. Go ahead. I see your hands up, Shereen.
Yes, I just wanted to share that I find that, well, I'll just use this as an example. I have a consumer who is a college student. He's 21 years old, and he had a really hard time with letting the disability services people on his campus know that he was a person with autism who needed accommodations for class. And his thing was, I'm a man and I'm not supposed to, have to ask people for help. So that was a big thing for him. So I find that it tends to happen a lot more, and this is just my opinion. I don't have any data to support this, but with males, as opposed to females, because there's this whole idea of I have to be responsible, I have to be a man, I have to, I can't let people know that I need help. I have to be able to step up and take control of the situation. So I just wanted to share that.
Shereen, what you just mentioned makes sense, and it looks like Alicia Johnson beat me to it in the chat with the intersectionality of not wanting people to know about a disability and toxic masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, if I can, sorry. My name is Liz. I'm from Accessibility here in Charleston. We're a Center for Independent Living. And we found that a lot of our youth in the rural areas, just kind of like you were saying, they are more, I guess, not willing to disclose that they have a disability. And then we actually run a group on the weekends where we have the teens and young adults come in, and they created a comic book, talking about different disabilities and, barriers and public access and transportation and everything. And we found that it's kind of opened up doors for their classmates, because we've had a lot of them take it into their class, and they've gotten excited because, they see other people with disabilities and, just all the positive things that they can do through advocacy. So that's been a huge thing for us, and it's been great to kind of see our kids grow and be more open and willing to share about their disability.
And then I just wanted to, really quick, I just wanted to capture Alan's comment, is that he said he could relate to this young man that you were speaking of earlier. He was like that before, and he thanked you for sharing. So I thought that was just important that, go ahead, somebody else was talking.
I was going to share something.
Yeah.
So what, like I said earlier, I kind of grew up in the blind community, but then when I went to college, it was very different, very closed. Like the people weren't just as accepting. And so I tried to hide my disability, but because mine's, kind of obvious when you walk around with a cane or a guide dog, So I wouldn't use those tools, and then I would run into things or get hurt because I wasn't. And it took a long time for me to accept, that the people around me are just closed-minded. Like, I didn't realize it until I was in like the mainstream world, basically. So, and so now I try to, when I'm working with youth or even anyone, because I'm new to the youth transition at our office here in Ellensburg. But I try to make people, like, let them be aware, like, I'm a person, like, my name is Sarah, but I'm blind. Like, I definitely identify as blind. It's just easier. Like, I don't want to explain to you what level of vision I have. I just straightforward blind, because when you say visual impairment, people like, oh, what does that mean? What level? Like, I don't need to explain my life story to you, but let me tell you about my disability. So it took a lot of experience to be able to open up about that, which I didn't realize was an issue until I got older, because I'd always identified as blind, but I was in the blind community, so it was different.
Sarah, this is Alicia speaking. Thank you for sharing some of your experience. I think what you brought up, as well as what Shireen brought up, really relate to that conversation about self-advocacy and self-empowerment. With our youth, I'm teaching 2 7th grade classes right now with students of mixed disabilities about self-advocacy and self-empowerment, and really telling that the rest of the world can honestly, like, I'm not going to use an expletive, but their opinion doesn't matter, right? And really being very radical and straightforward with the youth that I work with, at least, about owning your identity, right? And all the layers that come with that intersectional lens. And I just, when it comes to, like, Shireen talking about masculinity, a lot of the times with, a lot of the males, high school, junior high that I work with, I talk about being a man as being able to own your stuff, right? Being able to own your emotional stuff, being able to own your physicals, being able to really step up, right? If you want to be a quote unquote man, step up, right, for society, and let people know about your abilities or disabilities or your emotions, right? So I just love, Sarah, that you brought up that came with time for you, and that you really were able to feel that self-empowerment and that self-advocacy, and not, really care what closed-minded people are thinking. I think that's the root, the core of it, really. So thank you.
Yeah, I didn't really know it was an issue. Like I said, I grew up until I graduated high school at the School for the Blind in Washington State. So I didn't realize, I had experience in the outside world. I did, but I mean, they're high school kids. I didn't think anything of it. But going to college and being surrounded by everyone who was sighted, everyone was staring at you, everybody offering you help when you didn't need it. And it was just overwhelming, and I didn't like it. So,
and I see in the chat, Heather has shared, I have a male consumer who uses a wheelchair, and he will struggle to do everyday tasks, but not ask for help. He almost tipped his chair over trying to get something off the floor rather than use his supports, minus the wheelchair, to safely pick up something off the floor. So I think it kind of really goes back to that, Alicia, your comment of toxic masculinity and the intersections that all of that plays within how and who we identify with. And so I actually wanted to kind of jump a little further into what you were sharing, Alicia, and some other people have shared too, of we can kind of talk about what that looks like, right? As long as we understand where some of those barriers are. What are y'all doing as programs? What are you teaching? Because we can't really jump right into, so you have a disability, you have a disability, you have a disability. Usually that doesn't do much, but turn them against whoever's talking. But how, beyond just us self-identifying and owning our own disabilities and our own identity, what does that look like to build towards them connecting with that?
I work at Able, South Carolina. We have an entire curriculum on self-advocacy. And the first lesson just talks about who we are as an individual. And we make sure to include that disability piece as part of who we are. So we talk about our hobbies, our strengths, our likes, our dislikes, and we talk about what our disability is and how all of these things together make us who we are. And that's after the conversation that I brought up earlier about self-identifying their disability. So it's really cool to see at the beginning of the class, a lot of them have never seen their IEP, they don't know what a disability is, to then realizing, okay, this is something that's a part of me and makes me who I am. So that's just one of the things that we do at Able that has been pretty successful.
I'm gonna piggyback off that with Cassidy. This is Paige. I'm Widget now with Able, and a lot of what we have been able to explore more in depth with some teachers that we've been in the classrooms with for a long period of time is a disability history and kind of the timeline, and we have various versions of this lesson that we've done with depending on time and the students that we're with. But I think really looking and picking apart at the history legislation wise that provides us rights, but then also some of those just those bigger moments in history, that those picture perfect images that we come to that you see in textbooks with other things, I think is a really nice, it pieces it together for youth that there is a history and there's a community. So creating this sense of identity that's larger than just yourself. And then being aware of what that looks like, that there's a shared history and experience that you can tap into and connect with and use moving forward. I think that switches a light bulb for a lot of youth, especially when you're looking at pictures and history of people that represent you in different points in time. So, you know, we see some of the things that are in our history books that are iconic that we can recognize and connect with, but placing those disability specific things over that and not comparing, but like layering in that context, I think makes a really big difference for youth to see like, oh, like we were doing some really cool stuff and it's not in my textbook, but it fell into this civil rights movement or in this same time period. And we were working together and these different groups were working together. And I feel like Crip Camp coming out when it did and being available on Netflix has really, like, I've pushed that a lot for youth. Like, have you watched this yet? With teachers, I tell them too, also, like, have you watched this yet? So it's cool to see that that's being utilized as a resource and not just an awesome movie to watch, but like something that can really kind of push youth forward. Sorry for my ramble.
No, that's fine. And I wanted to just point out, because Mary and me share a brain, but Paige, you hit perfectly on that. Of one thing I always talk about is community, right? Like, if you don't know that if you're not the only person, then what encourages you to want to attach to something that you can't relate anybody else with? So that community piece, and that goes to Mary had responded to Heather's comment with, I like to talk about interdependent living. In that case, the idea that we all need supports, different supports at different times in different environments. The idea of independent or interdependent living does not mean that an individual must do everything themselves. It means they are the ones making the choices over how things are done in their lives. I had a mentor that always taught me when we talked about interdependence of how many people cut their own hair. Usually we go to somebody else, or if we try it ourselves, sometimes we end up having to go to someone else when we didn't want to. But usually we go to somebody else. How many of us clean our own teeth? How many of us, do our own physicals, all of those things. We need somebody to do those pieces. How many of us bag our own groceries? How many of us stock the shelves at the grocery store? So community is made up of multiple people helping somebody else. It's just at that point in time, when you're behind the chair or sitting in the chair and somebody's getting ready to cut your hair, okay, this is how I want my hair. So I'm in control of how you're going to do what this is, and I'm going to share that with you. I always liked that explanation. And then Angie at the Ability Center of Greater Toledo, we offer a curriculum that offers a lot of role playing on self-advocacy and speaking up for yourself, depending on your disability, but also just on personal preferences, not completely focusing on the disability, but also just standing up for oneself. And then Sarah said, yes, I agree. Independence does not mean doing everything by yourself. Mel's, I see your hands up.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button for a moment. I had a question specifically on relation to Crip Camp. My center is just getting into Priettes, which I'm super excited about. But one of the pushbacks I've got is that good R rating on Crip Camp and getting that into schools, because it's like, as a disabled person, it's like, yeah, I wish I could have seen something like that when I was younger. But also, I was also raised in an abstinence only school district, and somebody talking about like, hell yeah, I got an STD. I know that would not have gone well inside of my school district. And I know it's still that way in many places. So I was wondering what approaches others have taken in including Crip Camp in their curriculum.
So, and Mel's, we're in South Carolina, so I feel you on some of those comments. We did a screening at our YLF this summer, and for youth that were under 18, we did send it home, like a parental kind of not a permission, but an opt out, because I find that those are easier to deal with. And we didn't have to get it back. So it was hey, we're going to watch this. This is what it's rated. And I can share that document with you of kind of how we broke it down. It's really short and sweet and simple. And like, here's why it's rated this, but here's why it's really important. And so if you're not comfortable with your youth watching it, like, please let us know. This is the date and time we're doing it. We've picked like trailers and bits and pieces to show that we could potentially show in a classroom, but I haven't really bridged that as much. And I'd be happy to pick your brain and brainstorm on what that would look like in a classroom lesson. But that's kind of the workaround that we did when we used it with our youth this summer at YLF.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think I look at the kind of shenanigans I got into when I was like middle school, high school, and then now as in my 20s, I look at people that age, I'm like, no, they couldn't possibly be, but yeah, they are. And so I would love to collaborate on that, just because we need, like, I think one of the barriers that we often have working with youth is that societal expectation to talk down to youth and young adults. And I know, like, when I was a youth, like I'd shut down, like, oh, you're talking down to me, this is not worth my time. So yeah, just figuring out how we can be authentic with that. So yeah, I'd love to collaborate on that.
Awesome. And Paige, you have people lining up in the chat saying, yep, you can go ahead and share that. So, and if you want, you can drop it into the chat, but you can also share it with me and I'll send it out afterwards. And this is just also a note. If you would like to be connected to these calls and making sure you're on the email list, if you didn't get it directly from me, make sure your email is in the chat. That way I'll know. Okay. So a couple of things that I pulled out from that, that Crip Camp pulling in. And so Crip Camp really, if you haven't seen it, first of all, watch it. Secondly, it has that disability history piece, and that realness to it as well. And that community that almost is built around the similarities that we find within each other and that sharing of needs. A lot of what Mary was talking about I'm trying to pull back up because she said it better than I could. Different supports at different times and different environments. I think that video does a great job of capturing a lot of that. When we emailed back and forth, a lot of y'all shared some of outside of the box things that you were doing and some of the things that you had seen. So any mentorings that you had done with young people or discussion around just straight up talking about the stigma and bullying that happens to people with disabilities, or that is assumed that will happen if I disclose my disability. Can anybody share some of those? They were just really out of the box, and Mary, I'm disappointed. She says she hasn't seen it yet.
Can you repeat the question one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I got distracted by the chat. So we shared on the emails about some out of the box pieces that come into this disability identity, some of the bullying that might have happened previously. And one of the specific things I heard is like when you're working with marginalized communities, how that plays a role in identifying somewhere else that you could potentially be marginalized for. And also some of the conversations surrounded about visible versus invisible and how that plays a part in this piece. And Alasia, you stick out in my mind as the bullying piece, but I don't remember it off the top of my head exactly what you had shared, but I remember I shared it. I passed it forward because.
Yeah, this is Alasia speaking. I do remember we were talking about, I was working with fifth grade, I think it was grade school or middle school, and we would do like let's say that 2 students or 3 students or 5 students sometimes, if it was a group of real rowdy, fun individuals, if they were having some conflict, usually I would talk with them one-on-one kind of first and just get like a general idea of how each student or person was feeling, in the conflict, and then kind of go from there too. That was kind of my beginning kind of steps, and do like, usually we would get to a point where all 5 of them or 2 of them or whatever size the group was could meet face to face in like like on the playground, on the grass, and we would just eat popcorn and talk about the issues. And usually with kids, they're pretty chill about like airing out their problems, and just saying what's on their mind, especially when they're given the space to kind of do so. So that was really helpful for addressing some negative comments that I was hearing amongst kids in regard to ability, in regard to academic ability. And it just helped having weekly group meetings where we ended up doing like weekly meetings of, this 5 group of young ladies who was having an issue with drama and, mental health shaming and all kind of stuff. So just those group meetings were really helpful for the young people I was working with. So.
I personally was told, so I have anxiety and depression, and I was personally told one time at work not to tell anyone about that because of the stigma. So now I make a point with my students. I recently just went through a 6-week outpatient program for my anxiety and depression. So I'm trying to share that experience with them to help kind of bring that down. And this is normal and it's okay to ask for help, because at one of my schools, there was a student who was constantly bullied for attempting suicide. And she is in 2 of my classes there. And so it's been really nice to have conversations that kind of normalize that with them.
Yes, totally, Cassidy. I love that. Just airing it out, just saying what it is, just being really transparent, like how someone was saying earlier, I think it was Amy, just about talking down to youth and how that's really degrading. Like just talking down to anyone is degrading, you know? So I really, yeah, I love that, you know, you made it a point to be on an equal level with your youth and say, you know, this is going on in my life. It's fine. What's up with you? You know, just very.
And what do you need? And what do you need?
Yes. Awesome.
Sorry.
It's okay. I thought something went wrong with my end. Thank you for sharing that, though. I agree with everything y'all have just said. I think that's fantastic. And Mary even put, naming it takes some of your power back from those who want to keep it quiet. Yep. If any of you are old enough to remember MTV when it wasn't what it is now, when they used to do Challenge Day, and it was where they like lined up two groups of kids, and they would say a statement, and you like went forward if you experienced that same statement. And what they found is that like youth that had come from different parts of the city and different experiences and different backgrounds all experience very similar things. And they would start with like something simple, but then they would go real deep. Like, I've dealt with racism, I've dealt with abuse, I've dealt with being bullied, I've considered suicide. I mean, just all these different things. That's one of the ways I used to go into the schools and kind of bring that a type of version of that, and to just talk about how we all have similarities, whether it's the hobby that we like, or if it's more important things that we need to air out, we need to share, we need to know that we're not alone. And that was my MTV, bring it into my classrooms. Lucy says, what happens often with me is people say you don't look disabled. I am deaf and suffer anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Yeah. What have y'all dealt with? Because I think a lot of youth probably experience that a lot as well.
When I was younger, I got a lot of, oh, you're too cute to be disabled. What does that mean? Anybody can have a disability. It's not just something that ugly people have. Everybody has it. I mean, everybody has something. So.
Yeah. And Mary dropped into the chat also a great educational opportunity to talk about invisible versus visible disabilities. I think that's a great point of what we often think of. Go ahead.
Speaking on invisible and visible disabilities, I myself didn't become disabled till I was around 18 years old. And so I didn't, like my brother I was born with spina bifida, and he's in a wheelchair, and I was so defensive over him, me and my siblings. And like, if anybody like messed with him or looked at him differently, we were super protective of him. And it was like, I grew up with like always protecting him, and you could see that he has a disability. He's in a wheelchair, he can't walk, and he's not, so we would always like being so protective of him. When I became disabled, I didn't even call it a disability. I just basically, like, I was on dialysis, and I never considered it a disability. I never like owned it and said, oh, I just said I was on dialysis, and I never took it as like a disability type thing. And I think that just recently this year, realizing like, oh, just because the Social Security doesn't consider you disabled doesn't mean you're not disabled, or doesn't mean you don't have a disability. And it's just like I could totally understand with the visible and not visible, and people assuming you don't have one, or if I know I'm like probably rambling, but I just want to say I totally get it. And that's pretty much what I just want to say. But that's when I talk about it with the consumers in our peer support group and our advocacy educational groups, I always talk about that, and that just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there, and just letting people know like my experience, so that this way they can be comfortable in speaking about theirs.
I can remember one time going to vote. I have cerebral palsy, and I'm also a kidney transplant recipient. So when I go to vote, I have to do curbside voting because it's just too much to try to walk inside. So when I pulled up for curbside voting, the lady who was standing out there, she just kept staring at me. And I said, I'm here for a curbside ballot. And she just kept staring at me. She just kept staring. It was just really weird. And then finally she takes her head and sticks her head inside my car and starts looking around. And she's like, why do you need curbside voting? And I had to literally show this lady my hand controls on my vehicle. I use one crutch now to walk. So I had to show her my crutch. And I was just so upset. And I just basically went off on the lady. And then I called the Board of Elections and told them they need to do some more sensitivity training because it was just very unprofessional, very rude, and very uncomfortable. And her words to me were, you're too pretty to be disabled. You look too pretty to be disabled. And I'm just like, what does that mean? And it was just a really, really bad experience. And I was just infuriated by it. But I said that because I could relate to what the young lady before me was saying. And it's really sad that these things still happen with people or to people with disabilities.
Thank you for sharing. I see Mel's, your hand is up. Do you want to go?
Sure. I just kind of wanted to bring up also just the what our responsibility is fighting ableism within our own disability community. If you like through some of the very beginnings of the disability movement, there are signs at protests that say our bodies are broken, not our minds. And as a mentally ill autistic, I'm like, oof, that doesn't feel inclusive. And though we have made strides forward, I know when developing a disability org, an advocacy org inside of my local area, that is 100% made up of disabled people. When talking to others, I was asked the question, well, how many of your members are chair users? And just going into like, oh, there's this idea of there's only one kind of valid disability or one look for disability. And that was coming from others inside of the disability movement. And so doing what we can to fight that ableism and those just all like it all intersects. Like Sierra's heard me go on and on about this forever. But yeah, just going into the sorry, brain rebooting. Just like it's not just a outside of the disability community thing. It's also if we are bringing in youth and then they come across that within this community, like, oh, this is where you're going to be accepted. This is where you're going to find this family. And then coming across just more ableism within the disability community can push youth away.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Mel's. And no, you can't say it enough. I will never tell you to stop. Unfortunately. Nellie, I see your hand is up as well. Do you want to share?
Yeah, this is Nellie, and a lot of the things that, I hear from our youth and that some of us might have had experience and that I hear from a lot of people is that, sometimes people react when there's like a visible disability or when there's an invisible disability. Like you get like different reactions and you're like, okay, how do I react or what is going on? Like, for example, I know someone who is autistic. And so for the longest time, they wouldn't, say that they were, because it was easier to go through life that way and not be questioned on, what they have or how they're handling it or, or like answer what's wrong with you, quote unquote. Whereas I have a very visible disability, like I use a chair. So, and I get the whole, oh, you're an inspiration or, oh my gosh, it's so awesome to see you go about your day. So you have very different reactions and it's always like, well, they don't really understand. So how do I educate or what do I say? So some youth have difficulties in like, what do I do? So it's really hard because And that's what I like when they have a cross disability group, the one that we have, because, you know, you can get like tips from somebody or support, or, you know, they might relate to someone else, even though it's not the same exact situation, but you're like, oh, yeah, they're going through like the same thing I am. That's awesome. So yeah, you go through life and you're just like, wow, you're learning stuff.
Thank you for sharing. I just want to go back up. Ryan had dropped in the chat. I was part of a Facebook convo yesterday of largely the deaf community where a post used the phrase hearing impaired. There was a big discussion that broke out about how deaf, big D deaf, is the right word. Other people who use hearing impaired for themselves strongly disagreed. I was trying to make the point that deaf, big D, and HH, so hard of hearing, is what the community prefers as a cultural statement, at large as a whole part, and that's what we should be using. Personal preference was different, but people on the thread were only arguing about using it to describe the community as a whole and how there's a lot of pride in being who they are. And then Lucy Below had said, I understand what you mean. I use hearing impaired for a long time and was insulted by my deaf college friend because I needed to get with the times and say the correct term. And there's a lot of the unagreeing of or dislike of what's wrong with you. And I would have never guessed. And you don't seem like you're autistic. We've all kind of experienced. And so I think all of these stories, I really, as we talked about at the very beginning, that representation. So one of the things I think is very valuable is making sure that we have those stories shared with youth, those experiences shared with youth, but not only those experiences and leave it in that sucks place for a lack of words, but what you did. So Shireen, I think you brought it up perfectly of this was my experience of voting. And this is what I did when they did that. This is how I stood up for myself. And I think that kind of goes back to, there was another comment on taking the conversation from just beyond your experience and some of your limitations or areas where you need help to understanding what power you have. And I think, oh, now it all runs together. Somebody had mentioned showing them their strengths and where that can fit in. And so I think that's where, if we can share where you can be powerful, how to use your voice, where to use your voice through those IEP education pieces and the self-advocacy classes, talking about history and how people have used their voices, but how you can use your voice, I think are so key. And I know so many of you have those like work pre-ETS programs, the pre-educational transition stuff that you're doing about going to work. I think that's a lot of what we see. I think we have time for one more. Joanne, do you want to go ahead? I see your hand is up.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to talk. Our program, we're still trying to get it going in Northwest Florida. Danny's on the call as well. We're working really hard at trying to get our youth transition and our youth program going in Florida. But in regards to what we've been discussing just here at the latter end of this hour about the ableism and things like that, I am a person with a disability. I've been a wheelchair user for since 2006. I have multiple disabilities with lupus and CIDP, which is AKA Guillain-Barré syndrome, things like that have affected my spinal cord and my legs and multiple other limbs. I have had the opportunity to be walking for the first time in 16 years. And in doing so, I've been able to see and experience both sides of the fence. And I see ableism is not truly what people mean. And we have to remember to give them a little grace, but also educate them, because a lot of times it's not that they mean to misuse vocabulary, if you will. It's just, they don't know. And it's not that they want to be disrespectful. It's just they don't know. And we have to be strong enough within ourselves to educate even the adult population, because I wasn't born with a disability. I didn't experience my disability until I was in my 30s. And so I had no experience with the disability community before that. And so I did not know. And now that I am an advocate, I've had years since 2006 to get that training and to learn the technology and to learn the terminology. And so I still make mistakes. And I think a lot of people do. So we just have to remember that I don't think any ill will is meant. And if it is, definitely address it in that way. But we have to still be patient and just take the time to take that deep breath and give a little education in a kind way. Kindness always goes farther than anything else. And that's just all I want to say. And thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So I see there the chat is just lighting up. There's no way I can capture it all in the time that we have. I do want to say the conversation has really shifted to a little bit of dating and education around that as well, which, boy, is that a whole different rabbit hole. So we can dive down that rabbit hole. I've never been afraid of that one. So maybe that's something we can dive down a little bit further on one of our future calls. I'll also say there's different conversations happening around what education and what should be expected from the person experiencing the discrimination or experiencing the comments, and who should actually be responsible for that education. So I think that's something that we can continue to explore, and who should have that onus on them of having to always explain, and especially when it comes to our identity, making sure that you're taking care of yourself first. And if that means that the organization should step in at that point and educate their team or maybe a community, maybe that's where, as a center, we can come around and support those individuals, or educate where is needed. But I thank you all for sharing so much. You shared so many stories for you, and I think so many youth can really identify with these stories. So I really thank you for doing that. And also, I'm going to save this chat because y'all are dropping in things quicker than I can even read. There's tons of resources here. So if everybody would just take a minute at the end, and if you would be kind to check out this evaluation and survey for us. We're trying to fill out who's here, what else do you want to learn, what have you learned from these, and where else can we go? We can only continue. We want to do what you all want to talk about and what you need. So take some time, if you will, fill that out. Our next call is going to be April 6th, same time. I think it's actually the same channel, the Zoom as well. So feel free to do that. I may follow this up with an email if any of you wanted to share some of the resources that you're using for this disability identity, self-awareness, self-advocacy, disability history, all those tools. Maybe we can do like a group share on that as well. And just as a reminder, if I don't have your contact and you didn't receive the link from me, I do send it out directly. So if you drop your email in the chat, I'll make sure you end up on the email list. But thank you all for sharing. I think this is great. Y'all have a great day.
Did you save the chat?
Thanks. Thank you. Take care.